I'm Fred, obviously the only son. And as such, had a bit of a different relationship with my father, but it was just as loving and just as caring, whether I was a son or a daughter. All of us were treated very equally. When I was in high school at Cabrillo, or maybe it was junior high out at the base, we had to read a book by Ray Bradbury, who was typically a science fiction writer. But this book was an autobiography by him about his childhood in the Midwest in 1928 when he was 12, and just so happens my father was 13 at that time. And the book gave a very good flavor of what it was probably like for my father growing up then in South Dakota and North Dakota. The book was Dandelion Wine, and in the early parts of the story they keep talking about a time machine. And the young boys keep talking about this time machine that they go to. And being a Ray Bradbury novel, you expect it is a time machine. Later in the book, it's revealed that the time machine is really an old man who lives in an apartment above the Mercantile downtown. He's a very old man who was around in the 1800s. And the time machine was these boys going into the soda fountain, getting their sodas, and then going upstairs to the old man's apartment and listening to his stories about his life. His recollection was very good. His life had been very full. He had many, many stories, and he could tell them. And when I read that as a young man, it immediately just shot to my heart that that was my father. My father was a time machine. And his life was so full. He and I talked about his earliest memories as a child, and it was Armistice Day Parade at the end of World War I that he remembers very clearly. He remembers the parade, he remembers waving the flag. And that goes back, I mean, that's history for a lot of people, well, not a lot, but a few people in this room, that is history. But he lived it. He went through the 20s and the First Depression with his uncles and his father losing their banks, and all of them moving into his grandparents' house to make ends meet. He went through the 30s as a young man, graduating from college at South Dakota State University. And then he hitchhiked across to California and left a wonderful letter about his trip and his observations. You were there, going into Orange County with him and him smelling the oranges. I mean, they actually had orange trees in Orange County at one time. When he saw World War II looming, he decided to enlist in the military because he knew that chances are he was going to be told to come in, so he went in on his own and volunteered. And through that, he managed to get into officer candidate school at Harvard, where Robert McNamara was one of his teachers. Clark Gable was one of his OCS mates. In fact, Dad said, when you watch training films of Clark Gable doing calisthenics, you can see his arm off to the side of the film because they were next to each other. Somewhere in his military career, he was sent home on leave, where my mother, my soon-to-be mother, I guess, was boarding with his family, with his sisters and with his parents, because they kicked all the women out of the dorms to board the military men. And so the women had to go into town and live with families. My mom just so happened to be living with my dad's parents. They courted in the traditional manner for 2 weeks, and then my dad was on a settee with somebody watching, probably one of Dad's sisters. He went off to Washington for bombardier school in preparation for going to North Africa. On his way back from Washington State, he stopped in South Dakota and convinced Mother to accompany him to New York. He also convinced her to marry him, and they got married at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. They got married March 25th, 1943, and Dad took off for 2.5 years to go fight in North Africa and to go into Italy and help liberate Europe. They never saw each other during that time. One of the stories I remember is that Dad told his father, take a portion of my check and buy Fran flowers every week. Grandpa did that for a short while until Mom said that's not practical. Put the money back in the bank. Those are the children of the Depression, and those are the values that we've been given. Dad came back from the war and decided to try entrepreneurship as a chicken farmer, a painter, and a businessman, and proceeded to start this family. In the late 40s, things weren't as easy as he thought as a businessman, and then in the early 50s, Korea loomed and he was called back into service and decided to stay. The next 4 of us were born at major military bases, 2 in the United States, 2 around the world. Dad stayed with the military after that, and in the late 60s, as Vietnam was accelerating, he felt like it wasn't his military anymore, that things were changing from what they were in the early days. And he decided to take his retirement at 27 years and get out. And he chose Vandenberg as the place that he wanted to retire because this is where he wanted to raise his children. After retiring, Dad went on to get 2 masters, 3 masters, several master's degrees with honors, while he still had children at home and had to raise a family still, but he went and did that. And then he taught for another 25 years. He put in 2 full careers in his lifetime and then lived well beyond the last career. So he did have a very colorful life, and he was a time machine. And he was also timeless. I thought Father would live forever. He wanted to go to 105 because that's what Deisties do. Neil Deisty, Dad's cousin, is here. The family has a history of longevity, and it was not beyond conception that Father could live to 100. But I could see in the last year or so that he was tired. He hurt his back stomping down the trash in the trash can. Fell out of the trash can, hit a 4-inch cement ledge, got up, and I think he drove himself to the hospital then too. But since that time with his back pain, I could just see the slow decline. And I know in my heart that Dad did want to go out feet first. He wanted to go out with his boots on. He didn't want to sit in a hospital room and stare at a ceiling and spend the last days of his life that way. So I am thankful that we had that week, that we had that 1 week in which we could all gather and spend time with Father. And we relived his life with him, I think, because what we heard as ramblings is turning out that he was reliving his life, and we were picking up little snippets of it as he was in his hospital bed. He was a wonderful man. He was my hero. He was my mentor. He's a teacher. And as a son, you wonder what your legacy is from your father. My father was a military officer, and I tried that, and it didn't stick. My father was a teacher. I haven't tried that. You never know. But what I realized is I was sitting with my daughter the other night, reading to her, and I swear I saw the image of my father in the doorway, looking at us, approving how I was treating my daughter. I realized that the legacy he leaves me is to be the best father and the best husband that I can to these 2 wonderful women over here. Finally, I could go on too. He was a wonderful man, and many of you here, all of you here know that. But in parting, the Motts, who've been longtime friends of our family, who we grew up with their sons, Boy Scout trips, just camping trips, just so much time together as family and children. And when Beth told Robert, their oldest son, of my father's passing, Robert wrote a very nice note to me that I think I couldn't say it better. Dear Fred, my mom told me of your dad's passing, and I want you to know how much I admired him as a role model, a man of integrity, discipline, duty, and family. Growing up, we were sometimes scared of the colonel's gruff exterior. But as I got older, I began to appreciate his sense of humor, the largeness of his spirit. I'll remember him with fondness and respect the rest of my days. And I think all of us here will do that as well. So Father, you lived a wonderful, tremendous life. And I know there's a place for you in heaven. It is the love that we feel here that puts you in heaven. And I know that he's at the right hand of God. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for sharing in our loss. But let's also celebrate the life that he had and the life that he leaves behind. Thank you. This is his granddaughter, by the way.